Good morning or good afternoon all. My name is John Markovic. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on the Bureau of Justice Assistance Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program. It's a competitive grant program to support law enforcement. Again, welcome to this solicitation webinar. I think you'll note in the slide that we had up first, this is the Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program. I think it's important to note that, yes, this is a grant program to lease or purchase body-worn camera equipment, but it's not merely an equipment purchase program, nor is it a program for reimbursement of funds you've received, funds you've already expended. So that'll become clear throughout the webinar. The first thing I want to do is just give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today. So we'll cover the eligibility, who's eligible to apply for this award, the objectives and deliverables associated with this award, the program description, some of the funding metrics that are particular to this award, how much funds you can request based on the number of body-worn cameras that you plan to purchase or lease under this program. We'll talk about what can and cannot be funded. We'll talk about the match requirements in this grant. We'll talk about the required elements for all Bureau of Justice Assistance grants, the required elements specific to this grant, what we call BWCPIP for short. Some of the priority considerations that we have this year that the administration has placed on most awards for law enforcement agencies, tips for clarity and peer review. We'll talk about the selection criteria, how your competitive applications will be scored, and important dates. So I just want to be clear here that we're running actually two concurrent solicitations for body-worn cameras. The webinar that we're focusing on today is the Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program to support law enforcement agencies. Last year, we did set aside funding for a micro-grant project that is specifically targeted to small, rural, and tribal agencies. And the criteria for that is any agency 50 or fewer, any county agency, even if they're above 50, that's serving in a rural community, a non-metropolitan county, and all tribes are eligible for that grant. It's a streamlined grant application process. You can indicate your intent to be notified when that award solicitation opens at www.srtbwc.com. And I said, note that this is a grant solicitation, is about developing a body-worn camera program, and it's with careful deliberation, a full and comprehensive program. The development of a policy is key. We'll uncover this as we go through. Just to notify you up front, these are the relative deadlines. We'll get into this in a little more detail at the end, but this year there's a new process. It's a two-step process. A grants.gov deadline of July 12th applies for submitting some documents, and then the full application, including your project narrative, is due on July 26th. So the eligibility for the body-worn camera program is essentially open to publicly funded law enforcement agencies. That includes states, units of local government, federally recognized Indian tribes, and public agencies as defined by this particular subsection of statutes. It really means any state, unit, or local government, or combination of such states or unit. Well, you can look that up for more details. I'll get into some examples here that should clarify the legal language. I will note that correctional agencies are eligible to apply. They've applied in previous years, provided they're publicly funded and they perform law enforcement functions as a regular part of their duties. So this is just a sense of who has applied in the past and successfully received grants. These are all publicly funded agencies or representatives of them. I'll I won't read those out. I'll let you take a look at those. I'll note that there are two categories here: regional consortia and state administrating agencies. In past years, we had a separate section of the solicitation for those, but those are basically agencies that apply on behalf of membership agencies. So a regional consortia was the Regional Justice Information Service in Missouri that covered law enforcement agencies in and around St. Louis. They applied for the award with perhaps a couple dozen to 3 dozen. They applied in several different years. Agencies, law enforcement agencies that were members of that group as sub-recipients. We also had the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, which is a state administrating agency, apply on behalf of a number of agencies in a couple different funding years. So those are all possibilities. So if you're a publicly funded law enforcement agency, you're generally eligible to apply, or if you're a consortia representing them, you're also eligible to apply. We got some questions beforehand, and I think one was from an agency similar to the Regional Justice Information Service in Missouri. Okay, so just to clarify, this program supports agencies that are seeking to establish or expand comprehensive body-worn camera programs. And we'll come up with some examples of those as we proceed. So, as I said, this is not just a purchase plan. You should have a specific plan outlined in your proposal that you'll implement this technology in a way that maximizes the benefits of body-worn cameras. You should describe a deliberate and phased plan to deploy the body-worn camera technology, and you should be able to expand and discuss how that'll benefit your agency and the community you serve. So how it serves your mission, how it's consistent with your mission. So there's some of the deliverables here about what you'll need to do should you be successful, and what you should convey in successful in achieving funding. This is what's expected. So you should relay your capacity to do this in your solicitation. So you should develop a planned and phased approach that seeks the support of the criminal justice and other community stakeholders. Certainly, you should be consulting with your prosecutor, who's going to be receiving the body-worn camera video for evidence. You should be able to track the operational procedures, the use of BWCs review, how you're accessing, storing, retaining, redacting video, how you'll manage your digital media evidence. You should pay attention to that as you prepare your grants proposal. We all know that body-worn cameras provide evidentiary value, so you should incorporate the fact that you recognize that and acknowledge how you'll leverage cameras for their evidentiary value, both within the department and with your prosecutor. You should make it clear that you'll establish training protocols for officers, supervisors, and administrators who are using the BWCs. You should train not just you should cover how you're going to train them, not just how to use BWCs, but to the policy. You should address any issues about sharing body-worn camera footage. And it's important that you implement policies. There's a policy requirement that we'll get into in a little more detail how that's achieved. But increasingly, states are coming up with laws that dictate either elements of policy or policy. So you should make sure that you check where your state is and that you commit to be consistent with whatever guidelines or laws apply to your state in the use of body-worn cameras. So just to allow you to understand, so the body-worn camera program is driven by authorizing language. So it defines what we do and to some extent limits what we do. So this is a program that supports the use, it requires the purchase of body-worn cameras or lease of body-worn cameras, but again, it's not just an equipment purchase program. So agencies that are seeking to fund BWC program activities but have no plans to purchase BWCs will not be considered. That ties to the funding cap that we'll talk about. We're hoping that in the future we'll have some purpose areas for agencies that already have body-worn cameras and want to refine their programs without necessarily purchasing new cameras. But right now we're limited by the authorizing language that ties this to the purchase or lease of body-worn cameras. And as I said, it'll require the grantee to commit to developing a comprehensive BWC program, and your proposals will be based on your ability to do that. And if you're just telling us you need body-worn cameras and you don't really wrap it in a justification for why you need those and how you'll operate those, you're not going to be very successful if you just say we need body-worn cameras and pretty much leave it at that. So just keep that in mind as you're writing your proposal. Just want to give you a sense of the types of programs we support. So we support pilot implementation. So if you're just wanting to try out cameras, a limited number of cameras before you deploy fully, you are eligible for funding. If you're implementing a broad scale program to deploy cameras across a broad swath of your officers, maybe all patrol officers or all officers who have regular contact with the public, that's allowable. Program expansions are also allowable. If you've received BWC funding in the past, or if you started your body-worn camera program on your own and now you want to expand it, that's permissible. And one example of that is we funded the Los Angeles Police Department to expand their body-worn camera program once, and then they came back and sought additional funds to expand their program to their transit officers. So that was allowable. And I think the last bullet point, I think, just enumerates a bit more the implementation of a broad scale program. So, okay, we do support partnerships. As I mentioned, we had a separate category in the past for consortia applicants. By far, our largest number of applicants are single agency applicants who are applying for funding on their own awards, on their own behalf. We also have partnership applications, which are not necessarily a consortia, but an example of that is recently we had the La Crosse, Wisconsin Police Department apply last year and receive awards on their own behalf, as well as some smaller departments, a rural department and a tribal department within their general area. So the La Crosse, Wisconsin Police Department was the primary applicant, but they brought the other agencies in as sub-awardees. And we'll have some examples when we talk about the funding metrics here and the budget. And then the consortia application, that's an instrumentality of law enforcement agencies. So as I said, the REGIS, the Regional Justice Information Sharing System in the St. Louis area, and the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency were two such agencies. And similarly, they apply as the primary grantee and provide the funding to sub-recipients that are included in their application. The match requirement is there's essentially a one-to-one match, what we call 50% match, which is sometimes a little confusing. It's basically a dollar-to-dollar match, and we'll unfold some of that as I give you examples of budgets. We want this money to be distributed widely, so we have placed a funding metric cap of $2,000 per camera. That's the maximum amount that can be requested in federal funds per camera. Doesn't mean that the camera is going to cost you $2,000, but for each camera you have $2,000 worth of federal expenditures. You don't have to use that. You don't have to request the maximum amount, but whatever you request, you need to match, and we'll talk about matching a little bit. So basically, the number of cameras that you propose in your project times $2,000 is the maximum amount you can request. And then the total program cost would be your requested funds and matching funds. So there's the individual cap that applies based on how many body-worn cameras you request, and then no federal award under this solicitation may exceed $2 million on the federal side of it. Okay, just real simple examples here. So let's say you're a municipal law enforcement agency with 100 full-time sworn. You want to provide funding for 80 officers. Under the metric, it's $2,000 times 80. So the maximum award would be $160,000. And if you were to, let's say, implement a pilot program, say your sheriff's office, and you want to try out 25 body-worn cameras before you move to decide whether you want to move to full implementation, you can apply for funding for, let's say, 25 BWCs to be deployed to a select group of officers. And under that funding, under that situation, the funding cap would be $50,000, $2,000 times the 25 body-worn cameras you intend to purchase or you propose to purchase. Now you don't have to go for the maximum amount. These are just kind of drilling home, I think, a point that's fairly obvious by now, but if you did a program expansion, let's say you already had body-worn cameras, but you wanted to expand it beyond, in this case, 400, it's 400 times $2,000. The next one is a little more complex. It's the partnership application. Let's say a sheriff in an urban county intends to deploy body-worn cameras for their 50 deputies, but they realize that there are other agencies that they work closely with within the county. Let's say a department with 10 officers, a department with 6 officers, and a department with 4 officers. They want to deploy funding cameras to all those officers, so they can apply for 70 body-worn cameras, including all 4 agencies, themselves and the 3 other agencies within their vicinity, and applying the $2,000 camera metric times those 70 cameras, it would be $140,000 would be the funding cap. I think that gets the point across probably. So these are allowable costs for federal funds under this grant program. It allows for the purchase of body-worn cameras, licensing, contracts, related equipment and equipment upgrades, training for officers, support personnel if you want to apply. We can talk about this in the match scenarios a little bit. If you want to dedicate personnel, you can allocate the funds to that personnel to your budget, either on the match or the federal side. You could fund community outreach efforts. You can fund research and evaluation, though you do not have to. And this year it's new. In the past, there had been a restriction against using funds for storage. This year, for this grant program, that has been lifted. So you can use funds to pay for body-worn camera storage. That does not apply to the small rural and tribal grant because that was funded with 2020 funds. But if you're going to apply for that, we can walk you through that. And as I mentioned early on, there was a link for applying for that. Right now, you can indicate your intent to apply for that, and that agency will, the group that's administering that sub-grant or that micro-grant program for us will be reaching out to you. I know some people have said that they've registered, they haven't heard back yet. I can assure you that you will. And if you don't, you can email me if you're concerned about not hearing back. But we're looking for that to launch within the next week or so. So unallowable costs generally for federal grants, and for this award, we don't allow for any pre-award expenses, nor do we pay for items that are contracted with a service provider prior to the award. We're not going to reimburse you for body-worn cameras you've already obtained. If you're adding to those, that's fine, but we can't pay you for what you've already expended, and we can't pay you for what you've already budgeted. We cannot, if your city has a budget for body-worn cameras, you can't say, okay, we're not going to move forth with that budget because we're going to apply here instead. That's called supplanting, and that's not allowed under federal grant programs. And none of our grant programs, with rare exceptions, can be used for construction or land acquisition, which would be hard to tie to body-worn cameras anyway. So there's a matching requirement. As I said, it's dollar for dollar. So if you apply for $20,000, your match would be $20,000. Match may be cash or in kind. A cash match is basically called a hard match, and it includes project-related costs. We have some scenarios that we'll walk through here that I think will clarify that. An in-kind match is called a soft match. It includes things like non-cash contributions, like you may match on, let's say, 50% of a sergeant or lieutenant's salary who will be managing your body-worn camera program. So you're expending that money that you would have expended anyway in support of this grant should you receive the award, and that's certainly allowable. So that's called an in-kind match. So cash or in-kind match are both allowable. One of the things that we warn on occasion, people will engage in what we call overmatching. So they might request $20,000 but match for $100,000, showing us every sort of imaginable thing they might use and expend in support of the body-worn camera program. That's permissible, but keep in mind that if you do that, you'll be held accountable to those match expenditures, like you're held accountable to the federal funds, how you expend those. So if you include it in your budget, we're going to expect that you fulfill those conditions. So overmatching can get you in a little over your head if you promise too much. So just be careful of that. We recommend against overmatching, at least by too much, and we'll have some examples here in just a minute. I think this outlines things that I've already said. You have to, identify the federal funds can cover no more than 50%. That's basically the dollar for dollar match. And the third bullet point there, I think, talks about overmatching. If you do say you're going to do it in your budget, it's mandatory and subject to audit. So the caution again about overmatching there. And basically what you match on, the same restrictions apply to your match funds as apply to the federal funds. And that's just repeating the details, emphasizing it can be either cash contributions or in-kind contributions of goods or services. All of these expenses should be directly related to the purpose for which the grant was awarded. So it has to be reasonably tied to your body-worn camera grant program and the execution of that program. Next slide, please. So here's a very simplified budget. This agency is looking for 100 cameras. They've put the expenses for the cameras on the federal side of the budget. They put in the expenses for a program manager and BWC training on the federal side, and then they may have a balance of other services, a docking station, a server upgrade, docking stations to download the data from the videos, and then they may have training for how to deal with the digital evidence media generated from body-worn cameras, allocated at $5,000. These are just sample budgets and very simplified. They are no means prescriptive of what you should or shouldn't include in your budget. You're given a lot of leeway in how you design your programs in accordance with allowable expenses. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know that this was active. So here, interactive. So here, just to emphasize, you're consistent with the 2,000 camera metric, and the total cost of the project is $400,000, $200,000 on the federal side and $200,000 on the match side. Okay, here we have a slightly different scenario. This one is not as bundled with all sorts of personnel costs and system upgrade costs, but essentially what this agency is doing is they're saying, okay, we're going to get 54 cameras, and we're basically splitting those. We'll pay for half. We expect to use federal funds to pay for half, and then they also added in on the federal side $3,000 to attend the BWCPIP meeting, to travel to a BWCPIP meeting. So in this case, there's basically a slight overmatch, but that's okay. And in this case, they did not go to the full funding metric. They just chose to seek budgeting and seek funds for part of their body-worn camera program. They could have theoretically applied for $108,000 based on their 54 cameras. So those were just two examples. Again, they're just illustrative and they're relatively simplified. So an important part of the body-worn camera is that you develop body-worn camera policies that are deliberate, comprehensive, and partnership-based. Policy development or certification is mandatory, and 90% of your funding is contingent on policy development. So that's a condition of the grant. We don't want you to just go out there willy-nilly and deploy cameras without a policy. That rarely happens, but we don't want that to happen with the body-worn camera grant. And this was something that was baked in and very key to this program since its inception in 2015. So being that this is important, should you be awarded, I want to let you know that there are two ways you can get your body-worn camera policy approval or policy development condition cleared. One is historically through the BWCPIP scorecard. So you'll work with our TTA provider, CNA. Chip did the little introduction about the logistics of the webinar. They will work closely with you to review and provide you assistance developing your policy, showing you other policies, guiding you through some of the just some of the considerations that some of our early agencies particularly had in developing policies when body-worn cameras were not as prolific as they are today. So that's there for you if you need it, but we recognize that there are some agencies that already have policies developed, expansion agencies. So we do allow for a self-certification process by which your executive would essentially look through and provide a checklist that certain elements of the policy are there that's comprehensive, deliberate, and partnership-based. It tracks well with the scorecard, but those are for agencies who don't need and don't want the hand-holding. The scorecard option is always there for you. Again, this applies to people who do receive awards. Sometimes, just as a clarification, agencies attach existing policies to their application. That's fine, but you're still going to have to go through the policy clearance process should you be awarded. Don't think that just because you sent your policy with your application that clears the condition. So just a little bit about the training and technical assistance provider. We've, since the inception of this program, we've had a competitive award for a training and technical assistance, and CNA is the corporation that is assisting with the awards. They're working in partnership with Justice and Security Strategies, another group that has extensive experience in body-worn cameras, and Arizona State University, who's done a lot of research on body-worn cameras and is well-versed on implementation issues with body-worn cameras and body-worn camera policy. So they're there to help you. They're there to kind of have regular contact with you should you be awarded, to provide general technical assistance, policy assistance, show you what the best practices are, help you engage with other peers. They put on webinars, specialized training that can help you with community research, or community outreach, whatever your needs are as you implement your body-worn camera program. Each awardee is designated a point of contact, subject matter expert, and someone else from CNA as an analyst to assist that subject matter expert. And they work with us to develop content for our body-worn camera toolkit and to provide a lot of knowledge products, a lot of it based on working with you, understanding your needs, and hopefully having you contribute some of your practices and help develop these products. Many of our current grantees and past grantees have contributed to these knowledge management projects, and that's working with the TTA provider. Okay, we're kind of getting down to the meat of the issues. This is what every body-worn camera PIP application must include. It needs to include the application for federal assistance, which is a standard form that you're required to fill out in grants.gov. Disclosure of lobbying activities, that's also through grants.gov, a standard form, just to assure that to provide any disclosure of lobbying activities is required of all federal grants. You'll need a project abstract. We'll get into details about that, a program narrative, a budget detail worksheet. This year, it'll be submitted online through Just Grants, the Office of Justice Programs, new grant management system. Financial management system of internal controls questionnaire would be required. You should disclose if you have any pending applications for BWCs, other grant applications out there. And if a partnership is proposed, we want a list of your sub-recipient agencies. There are some provisions of TBD, but you should really indicate that you have sub-recipients at the ready and who would agree to work with you should you, as a primary agency for sub-recipient agencies, be selected. And again, just to clarify, the policy scorecard is not required at the time of application. But if you want to include that, you can. Okay, these are things that you might include. There are screening sheets that basically outline what the requirements are of the grant. So those are accessible through the application. Fill it out for a single agency or partnership, as the case might be. Those aren't required, but those are helpful in framing the issue. And then as we do review, it helps us understand where information is consolidated in a single form. It basically checks to make sure that you're in line with our $2,000 funding metric, and make sure you understand, if you go through that questionnaire, it sort of outlines some of the requirements here, what your obligations would be in terms of management and commitment to the grant. There are, on all of our grants, DOJ priorities that were added by the administration. So essentially, you'll see it in the solicitation, but if in some way, shape, or form, you use the body-worn camera to promote civil rights, support crime victims, protect the public from crime and evolving threats, building trust between the law enforcement and the community. If you outline that in your grant and draw attention to that, you'll be given priority points when the grant is reviewed. Those are not particular to the body-worn camera program. And then similarly, if you document that you're serving a high poverty area or a persistent poverty area, you will be given priority consideration there. So fill those out if they're applicable. The details are in the grant solicitation itself. So here are things you should include when applicable. Mostly our agencies are not requesting indirect cost rate agreements. Those sometimes apply to administrating agencies who are going to take a certain amount to administer the grant. Oftentimes we have universities or nonprofits apply for grants, not for body-worn cameras, but for other things. And they sometimes have an indirect cost rate agreement that covers some of their costs for managing the grant. If you're going to do research, really research and evaluation, not, if you're just tracking, your program internally, that's not considered research, but you have a researcher or an evaluator working with you to assess your body-worn camera program, you should have the indications of research evaluation and integrity, and maybe a letter of partnership, just letting us know that the research is on board. And then if you're doing, have sub-recipient agencies, it's good to include a memorandum of understanding or a letters of support for sub-recipient agencies. But at the very least, you should list those agencies to the extent that they're known. So here's the sort of meat of the things. I think maybe I omitted the slide about the project abstract, but the project abstract is limited to 400 words. You should basically, do a synopsis of your project, tell the, basically indicate who you are, why you need the funding, and how it'll benefit your agency and the community you serve in the abstract. So in a project narrative, you have up to 15 pages, double spaced using standard 12-point font, use Times Roman. We prefer that. 1-inch margins. We really encourage you to use the sections and organize your submission based on the scoring criteria, which we'll discuss in a second. Your attachments do not count against that 15-page limit. So again, really think about the format. Think about if you were reviewing this, how much easier it is to review something that has titles and subsections and is listed out, is organized, is presented in an organized manner. So these are the things you should cover in your project narrative, and this will track with the scoring criteria we'll talk about in a minute. So you should have a section on descriptions of the issue, describe something about your agency and what the problem or what the concerns are that lead you to want to deploy body-worn cameras, what the benefits are. Discuss how you're going to design and implement your body-worn camera. Discuss the capabilities and competencies of your organization and its personnel. If you have partners that might be helping you with research, that should be included here. Basically, tell us how you plan on collecting the data. That'll show how well you're performing. When you're buying the cameras, what you're tracking. In terms, sometimes we'd like you to track your use of force and citizen complaints if you have an appreciable number of those, because research has shown that body-worn cameras can reduce both of those. There is a performance measurement tracking tool that, should you apply, that you'll be required to submit, that sort of lays out and helps you track your progress on the grant and report your progress. And last thing you should do is you should tell us in your proposal how you plan to continuation the program once federal funds have been expended. So should you be awarded, we expect that this program will last beyond the 3 years for which it's funded, your BWC program. For the budget, as I said, we kind of laid out some of the scenario budgets that were simplified. You'll provide that in just grants, to provide the narrative for the budget, to provide context. If you want, you can attach a separate budget narrative. That's not mandatory. I know based on past submissions, a vendor quote does not suffice as a budget. So you have to complete the budget form. Remember that the budget submitted at the time of solicitation is considered a cost estimate. It's a budget. And then if we accept your award, that doesn't mean that anything you've attached to it has been accepted in full. Your budget has to be cleared before you can expend money. We kind of look at it with more of a fine-tooth comb once you're selected for an award. So just because you attach a vendor quote, that doesn't mean that you're approved to go ahead with that purchase once you get the funds. You still need to do your due diligence for procurement during the grant period. So here are just some important elements of successful applications based on the 6 years that we've had this grant. You should look to economies of scales, partnership, shared resources. That always looks favorable when we review your budget and you're scored on your budget. Technical considerations, be aware of what the body-worn camera market is and what you might need in terms of equipment. There was a market survey done by the National Institute of Justice. This link is in the solicitation, but the market's constantly changing. So, just make sure that you let us know that you're going to be doing your due diligence in selecting the body-worn cameras. Again, we encourage you to convey how you'll work with other partners in your jurisdiction and the prosecutor. We used to require that the prosecutors provide letters saying that they'll cooperate with you. We recognize that was sometimes a limit to the timeliness of applications, but you should indicate in your proposal, it's advisable that you indicate how you work with prosecutors and other criminal justice personnel, and how you'll address officer concerns, how the body-worn camera will increase efficiency, improve evidentiary outcomes, how you use training, how you'll train on body-worn cameras, and maybe use body-worn camera training in footage, body-worn footage and training in the future. That would be advisable to include, and how you'll manage the expectations of the public. All these things are advisable to include to show that you have sort of a full and comprehensive program. So there is a performance management and requirement for this grant, and you'll be required to commit to providing that data in the PMT form should you be awarded. So this is the important area. So as you prepare your proposals, keep in mind that these are the sections that we'll be looking at closely and scoring you on. So again, organization and having sections with clear titles along these lines, if not explicitly using these titles, is strongly advisable. It makes it much easier for the peer reviewers, and they're more likely to score you fully if they understand the logic and the layout of your application. So you'll be scored 15% on the statement of the problem, 35% on the project design or implementation, 15% on your agency's capabilities or competencies, 10% on the performance measurement tracking, 20% on the budget, and 5% on program continuity. So just be sure that you include something about how you'll continue the program, that you'll allocate budget funds in the succeeding years, or that you might seek other grants, or you may use, asset forfeiture funds. I'm just thinking of some examples that past grantees have used to justify how they're going to continue funding the program once the grant period is over. So remember that this is a competitive grant solicitation program. These are major takeaways. It's not merely an equipment purchase program. You can't use these funds to pay for equipment, cameras you've already bought. Your funding is contingent on the policy development process that needs to be cleared by BJA, working with the TTA provider with either the scorecard or providing the self-certification. And then if you're successful in getting grant awards, there may be other conditions that need to be cleared besides the body-worn camera policy condition, depending on how complete of a package that you submit to the body-worn, to BJA. Sometimes there are outstanding documents that we'll need before we can really allow you to obligate funds. This is a 3-year grant program, so budget accordingly. Right now with COVID, do put in plans there to attend a national meeting, maybe 2 staff from, and plan for that to be in Washington, DC. But with COVID and with other considerations as we move more towards digital connections and virtual meetings, we may reconsider the national meeting requirement. So include that in your budget, planning for a trip to DC for a national meeting, but we'll be flexible on that, and we may reconsider whether that national meeting will occur. And the basic takeaways, the more that you understand the value of a full BWC implementation and addressing the considerations of this grant, the more competitive your solicitation will be. So basically be as comprehensive as possible within the 15-page allotment. Okay, so there's really 3 steps. You should register with DUNS if you have not already done so. This year, there is a 2-stage registration process. You need to register with grants.gov by July 12th. That needs to be, you need to designate your authorizing organization representative and acquire confirmation for that point of contact. And then the main application will be through grants.gov, which is due July 26th, 2 weeks after the grants.gov deadline. And those are the links to locate this funding opportunity. That's the link, or you can just go to the BJA funding page and look at current opportunities, and you'll be able to see the body-worn camera grant there. That's the link to Just Grants there. So as I said, applications will be submitted in a 2-step process, each with its own deadline. The SF-424, which is a standard form, and the SF-LLL, which is the disclosure of lobbying activities, are due to grants.gov. And then the full application, which is your kind of the things you'll get scored on, the things that are critical, the project narrative, the budget, the project abstract, should be submitted through Just Grants. All this is laid out in the solicitation. I'm just giving a high-level overview of that now. Next slide, please. You can go to this website. It helps you, takes you through a checklist. This is generic for all federal DOJ and OJP applications in Just Grants. So just make sure that you're provide some assistance in a checklist. There's also a checklist at the end of the application itself. These are some e-learning videos that are helpful if you want to learn about Just Grants. It's a new system, so there are some growing pains, but we hope that you're, hopefully some of you have started your application process and have been immersed in Just Grants. There are helplines and so forth, but these are some of the training tools. Next slide, please. And this is just ways you can stay connected with BJA and the Office of Justice Programs in general to be made aware of the ongoing funding opportunities and our activities. Next slide. This is the important contact information for technical assistance on grants.gov. So submitting those documents to grants.gov, and then later the training and technical assistance for the full application through Just Grants. If you have questions about programmatic requirements, essentially things I covered today, contact the OJP Response Center. They will field your questions, but they do reach out to me for things that they may not be able to answer, and I respond to them pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So that's the information about NCJRS for questions about basically the substance portion of the grant, and those are their office hours. There's my contact information. If you reach out to me directly, I don't have the bandwidth to reply as much as NCJRS, but I'll do my best to reply. And if you reach out to NCJRS through phone or through email, they will contact me when need be. They've been doing this grant for 6 years, and they're very proficient at addressing those concerns and forwarding the ones to me that need to be forwarded to me. Next slide. So I think I saw as I was presenting a lot of questions pop up, and I think we've gone, I think, the full hour, but I think we've gone 55 minutes. So let's go ahead and maybe address some of the questions that have come up in the question and answers. I don't know if Emma or Rachel, you want to share those with me. I'm going to open up my chat and see if I can navigate those.
Yeah, John. So we have received several questions. But the first one I would like to ask is, are we going to be able to share these slides and this recording with all these participants? Will we be posting them?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Chip mentioned this is recorded, so we'll share that, and the slides are shareable as well. So I think I'll send you, Emma, a copy of it without my notes on there, just so you have that. But I think you're able to produce. So this will be posted probably in a few days or a week. I'll make sure that the slides are shareable, and you can reach out to the TTA provider for that. This is basically the same email that was mentioned when you register. I think they have access to the BWC TTA email. Is that right, Emma?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So then we have several other questions. Someone asked, can we apply for both the micro grant and this grant as well? Or should we plan on applying for one or the other?
You can apply for both of them. I mean, just that, make sure that you're eligible for the micro grant. If you apply for both of them, you're not going to be funded under both of them. So, if the criteria may be a little bit different, and the micro grant program is a bit more of a streamlined application. So should you be awarded both, you'd be elected to choose which avenue you go, but there's nothing that prohibits an agency from applying for both.
So for cities that are just starting their program, can they use funds to purchase IT servers and things like that?
Yeah, they can. I think to support the implementation of the body-worn camera program. And it's a little bit, the storage issue is no longer an issue. So yeah, that's fine. It used to be in previous years, we're a little careful about whether those servers were basically going to be used for storage, and there was the legislative language that prohibited funds being used for storage, but we no longer have that restriction. So yes.
Also, can you clarify, can the program be used for leased body-worn cameras, or is it only for purchased body-worn cameras?
It's for leased body-worn cameras. Just keep in mind, it's a 3-year grant program, and you do have some startup time. So the funds should be expended within the period. So I know in the past, sometimes people have applied and they've gotten a 5-year lease agreement and completed a 5-year budget. You need to restrict your budget to the grant period, which would begin on October 1st of 2021 with the new fiscal year, should they be awarded, should they be selected.
Okay. In a partnership grant, does only the lead partner have to submit the SF 424 and the SF LLL? Yes. Can you please confirm that indirect costs for agencies that have a federal rate letter are allowed? And can you confirm whether voluntarily waived indirect costs can be used to meet or partially meet the match requirement?
They are allowed, and I don't know, I haven't run across this situation for the indirect costs, so being allowed for match. I'll check the person. I'm more on the substantive end of the grant, so we have the program administrative folks who work on the grant. If you can copy that question and send it to me, Emma, or if the person who asked it can send me that directly, then I can get that answered.
You might have touched on this a little bit, but for agencies that have received a grant and have not fully implemented their program yet, can we apply for another grant to expand their program, even if they're not fully implemented?
Sure, yeah, as long as, I think we've had several agencies do that. As I mentioned, LAPD, had applied for grants, and then they came back a year or two later when they expanded to the transit officers. So that's allowable as long as you're expanding and getting more cameras, right? If you're expanding your program or refining your program, not getting cameras, the qualifier is how many cameras you're proposing to get. And so that's what drives the funding cap. So we're hoping that in future years, we're able to support programs that are refinements without expansion. But right now, the statutory language limits us.
Okay. Are agencies able to obtain a copy of a successful application for program expansion?
We don't generally share. I would suggest that they go to the BWCTTA site that's run by CNA and look on the map there. If maybe somebody from CNA can post that in the link, but if you just do BWCTTA and search for it, and then you look at sites, you'll get a map and you'll see who was funded in your region. It's a zoomable interactive map. And you may want to reach out to your neighbors, but we just don't have the capacity, nor do we, as a practice, submit other agencies' applications. But you're more than welcome to reach out to your peers and see if they'll share their successful applications with you. I do see a question there about performance management. It was brought to my attention that there was a link to performance management that was not active in the solicitation. And so there's no performance management data to submit with the application, but we wanted to make you aware of what that form and that requirement for submitting data would look like should you be awarded. So I can't do that now just because I'd have to switch computers, but I can provide a link to the TTA provider, or you can reach out to me for that. But it basically just will show you the format of what's expected in that performance management tracking tool report,
we have several other questions, but so one I see is the 15-page limit inclusive of research and evaluation discussion, or is that an attachment? And then a follow-up to that, is there any guidance on minimum or maximum costs for research and evaluation?
No, that depends on the scope of research and evaluation. That should be covered within your 15 pages. You may supplement that with attachments, the CVs, if you're bringing on researchers, maybe a description of their organization, what they've done that's similar. Those attachments are fine, but we don't want a separate narrative in effect as an attachment that tells us what research they're going to do. That should all be covered within the 15 pages.
Okay. And I know
just to keep in mind that, this is not, we welcome research being done, but it's, not a requirement of the grant. So it certainly will be considered beneficially if you're going to do some sort of robust evaluation or research of your program, but it's not a requirement.
Okay. I know we're a little over time. John, do you want to answer a few more questions?
I can answer a few more questions, and then I think we'll take a look at the other ones, and then feel free to reach out through the NCGRS with the questions, or, within some of the ones that I mentioned, you can email me directly, particularly if you want the link to the PMT site. I'll collect those emails. Well, send that to the TTA provider if you can, and then we'll amass those and make sure that you get the link to the link that was omitted in the solicitation itself. Again, it's not you're not required to submit a PMT form with your application. It's just informing you what it would look like should you be awarded.
Okay, so we have a few other questions about funding allowances that I will ask. So if part of the overall BWC system, will car-mounted cameras be eligible for funding?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part?
Yes, so if they are part of the overall BWC system, will in-car cameras be eligible for funding?
Yes, they are. You're still restricted to $200 per camera metric. So the only thing that counts for that metric is the body-worn cameras. So you can't claim $2,000 for an in-car camera. But if you were to submit a proposal for 20 body-worn cameras, your cap would be $40,000. If you can integrate the in-car cameras as part of your match or part of the federal funds even, that's fine. And we understand that that they're sometimes bundled and that they should work in a coordinated manner. So that's fine.
And then the cap on BWCs are $2,000 per camera. What is the cap on IT storage cloud costs for the grant funding?
We don't have any cap. Basically, the $200 camera metric sort of sets the ceiling for federal funding. So considering your match and your federal funding, that kind of covers all the program costs. There's just so many different iterations of how body-worn cameras programs, body-worn camera vendors price out and bundle their services, or what agencies must do, whether they're storing data on their own server. So we're not predictive, but we just use that general $2,000 body-worn camera funding to provide a ceiling on the cost, $2,000.
And then as a clarifying question, so since this is a 3-year grant, are year 2 and year 3 part of the $2,000 cap from year 1? Or will the cost of year 2 and year 3 stand on its own as new funds?
The cost, so, if you were to request 20 body-worn cameras, so that would be $40,000 is the cost of the 3-year grant program. It's not recurring each year. It's the cost of the 3-year grant program.
All right. Well, as John mentioned, we will be posting these slides. And John, we can certainly make note of these questions. We have a lot, and I want to respect everyone's time. So.
Yeah, let me just return to the rural grant solicitation that will be announced. We were asked to hold off a bit on that to align it with some administration priorities. So if you have applied, there is the link there that you can apply for that grant, or basically indicate your intent to apply for the grant, and then our training and technical assistance provider for that grant, who will be administering the micro grant, is all prepared to reach out to you. I know there were a couple of questions that came in beforehand that they hadn't heard back, and they were concerned. Believe me, they're ready to start the grant. We're just sort of on a little bit of a holding pattern, and they've got a robust effort. Anybody who's indicated a desire to be notified, they'll be reaching out to them. But if you don't get notified, let's say in a week or two, feel free to reach out to me with an email about your intent to apply for the small rural and tribal micro grant program. Great. So I think, out of respect for people's time, I thank you all for attending. It looks like a lot of people stayed on, and we'll do our best to address the questions that have come in. Do reach out to NCJRS with good questions if you like. Thanks for that, and thanks for CNA for hosting this webinar.